Okay, can a traditional publisher drop an author for their behavior online? This is something we're starting to see pop up more and more inside of the industry, and there are times when they can and when they can't, and you need to know about it, whether you are an author, a publisher, or somewhere in between. Let's talk to everybody's favorite IP and entertainment lawyer, Tony, to find out more.
My name is Tony Iliakostas. I'm an adjunct professor of entertainment law and IP at New York Law School, and I have an Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok account called The IP Professor that is dedicated to all things intellectual property.
We've had some interesting things happen in the publishing industry recently, and I want to talk a little bit about traditional publishers and whether or not they have the ability to drop an author based on that author's public online conversations and the behavior that they are doing online. So are they able to then drop an author if they misbehave and potentially bring some bad press to that publisher?
So the answer is yes, but obviously, it's all going to depend on whether or not that agreement between the publisher and the author contains what's called a morality clause or a morals clause. And morals clauses are a very niche type of clause you don't commonly see in a lot of agreements, but they are so crucial, especially if you're dealing with, let's say, a famous person like a celebrity or an athlete or a public figure that maybe even has some baggage behind them from years prior that, the publisher is taking a chance on. But this could even be extended to the everyday person. So what's a morals clause? It's basically a right of termination clause that allows the publisher or even any entity to terminate a contract with the other side if they have done anything that would be deemed scandalous, deceptive, or even criminal activity. And let's put the criminal aspect to it to the side for a moment, because that's more about whether or not they were arrested or were involved in some other felonious activity. We'll touch on that in a moment. But the scandalous and deceptive behavior is something that's going to be a bit more. It's something that's going to more or less be on the onus is on the publisher to decide based on their interpretation of the facts or the totality of the situation, if they deem it as scandalous, immoral, deceptive behavior. So perfect example, not related to publishing, but actor Jonathan Majors, who has recently been in the third Creed movie, was playing King the Conqueror in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, has been in a bunch of different other movies, To Five Bloods I think he was in as well. Rising actor, probably one of the best young actors that has been out there, especially with the roles that he's been able to acquire. Well, unfortunately, he had a bombshell news headline dropped against him because he was arrested for what was alleged to be domestic violence with his girlfriend. And TMZ dropped it. There's obviously this ongoing litigation. He's recently pled not guilty to the charges of harassment and assault that have been pressed against him. But as a result of it, he lost a biopic role for I think it was Otis Redding, but it was a biopic film that he lost a role for. He was in one of the recent Army ads. Army completely dropped the ads. He was slated to do an ad campaign for the baseball team, the Texas Rangers, lost that opportunity. But meanwhile, Marvel has been very silent in terms of whether or not he's going to stay on as King the Conqueror, because essentially he's supposed to reprise his role in future Marvel films. And it's to the point that Marvel Studios internally has made disclaimers that when Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania would come out on Disney Plus or Blu-ray, DVD, the word was, according to insiders, that Disney and Marvel were planning to promote the film without making a heavy emphasis on Jonathan Majors. So it seems like they're not willing to cut ties just yet, but they're making efforts to kind of distance themselves from him. So the only reason, in that circumstance, it's we have an allegation of domestic violence. He's been, it hasn't been proved beyond a reasonable doubt, at least on the court level whatsoever. He's not been found guilty. He's not pled guilty. All we know right now is purely speculative. And surely, we hope that justice is served in one way or another. And, obviously, we all have a zero tolerance policy for domestic violence, no matter what. So obviously, this is a very serious matter all around. It was Army's discretion, the Texas Rangers' discretion, and the film studio's discretion that's working on this biopic to say, we're going to enact the morals clause and cut ties with Jonathan Majors. But meanwhile, Marvel Studios, which surely has a morals clause in the act agreement with Jonathan Majors, hasn't exercised yet. So it's a matter of opinion in those types of circumstances. But it's, even though it is criminal activity, it's something that hasn't risen to the level of it happening, being a full-blown actual criminal charge against him, or criminal conviction rather. There was another athlete, Kyrie Irving, who made anti-Semitic remarks on social media, lost his deal with Nike as a result of it. But meanwhile, there's another basketball player named John Morant, who's not once but twice flashed a gun on Instagram Live. Powerade, who's owned by Coca-Cola, has not dropped him as their spokesperson whatsoever. But meanwhile, he's facing potentially a looming punishment from the National Basketball Association. Mm-hmm. So the moral clause world is very fluid. It's very random. It's very weird. And bringing it back to this topic, the bottom line is it's really going to depend on the publisher individually to decide if the behavior by the author rises to the level of triggering the need to enact the morals clause. So that's something that I think is, really relative to each entity. And surely I think from the criminal aspect, it even adds a bit of a weirder wrinkle to it. But that said, that's the general nature of morals clauses. That's how they're enacted. And, I think generally speaking, it is a very unique aspect of contract law, because it really does create this basically a unique carve out for the licensor, or one of the entities of the party, rather of the party of the contract, to say, we're just gonna terminate this deal because we don't want to be associated with this person for the behaviors that they've engaged in.
That's really interesting. So with the publisher being able to then make that judgment call, is that something that they have to spell out internally? Do they have to have some kind of documentation of these are our boundaries, these are the things? Or is it specific to each occasion as it comes up? Do they just get to kind of like figure it out as it happens, or what is that?
So in a perfect world, you would want this defined, right? And I think that the worst thing about contracts is the level of ambiguity that oftentimes exists with them. So maybe if you're working with a publisher and they just say scandalous, immoral, deceptive, and criminal activity, you may want a definition of what is scandalous, what is deceptive, what is immoral. We know what criminal is, because if you're actually charged and even convicted with criminal activity, then obviously it's kind of like a duh situation. But scandalous, immoral, deceptive activity might be something that is open for interpretation. There may be a clause that would say that on a case-by-case basis, it would be up to the one party, the publisher in this case, to exercise the morals clause for any deceptive, immoral, scandalous, or criminal activity that the author engages in. And it's just a matter of evaluating it. Maybe they do an investigation. That might be something that is included in the contract term. So that's the kind of thing that could take place.
So let's say a contract does not have a morals clause, but there is an author who is not behaving well. What recourse does the publisher then have?
That's the hard part, right? So, I mean, then it leads to whether or not there is any other type of right of termination contract clause in the contract. I would imagine that probably the most kosher thing to do would be to have an arbitration of some sort, or send some type of written notice to the author with the expectation of having some type of arbitration to settle the issue, not in court, but basically by another neutral party. And that probably could be the way that you could get out of the contract if you're on the publisher side of things. But again, that's really going to be a matter of interpretation based on what the contract says. I would hedge my bets that even without a morals clause, a publisher could still terminate the contract, either by way of a mediation, an arbitration, whatever, and they could bring compelling evidence to show that, this author's behavior doesn't align with the brand's point of view or what have you. One thing I will say also, just kind of in that vein, since we're talking about this, there is another aspect of morals clause land. There's another type of morals clause that does exist called the reverse morals clause. And this type of clause actually is for the other side. So let's say that the author engages in a contract with the publisher, and the publisher themselves engages in scandalous, immoral, deceptive, criminal activity. Now at that point, you've got something that could be a terminable right for the author to back out of the deal with the publisher. And this has actually been sprung up as a result of the Sam Bankman-Fried scandal with FTX, where a lot of celebrities were endorsed the cryptocurrency service, and then obviously it went under, and now FTX users are suing the likes of Larry David, Tom Brady, Kim Kardashian, all these other celebrities that were on board with FTX. They're suing them for loss of profits and basically alleging that they were involved in the scheme that FTX was involved in. That could have been easily avoided if maybe there was a reverse morals clause where these athletes or these celebrities could say, you know what, I don't like what's happening here. I'm going to revert back. I'm going to pull back and terminate this contract. So let's say publisher X, you sign on to a contract with publisher X, and publisher X decides to work with a neo-Nazi to publish a book about white supremacy. Okay, there you go. That's the exercise of your reverse morals clause. So I think that would be a very beneficial tool for even an author to have in their back pocket, and certainly something to consider, especially if they know that the publisher has had a history of publishing controversial books. Maybe that's something that could be worthwhile. But I think that this is an automatic default in light of the FTX scandal. So I think that that's something that authors should seriously consider as a tool to have when they're negotiating their publishing agreements.
So as an author, if you are going through your contracts, it is wise for you to have a publishing or entertainment lawyer looking over this for you. Don't ever sign anything without having your lawyer look it over, because you will miss things. You do not know the law the way that they do. They will be able to protect you. But this is a good conversation to be having, to have that reverse clause in there to make sure you're protected as well, because you never know what might happen once you sign on. So when it comes to making sure that we are protected with this, should anything happen where a publisher might try to exercise a moral clause, if you feel like you have done nothing wrong, it would also be wise for you to reach out to a lawyer and have them guide you through this process. But if you have further questions on any of this, now is the time to drop it down below. Tony is coming back for upcoming episodes to keep us legally protected in the publishing space. And we want to make sure we're getting your questions answered as quickly as possible to get you back on track within your publishing world, to make sure that you are making this your most profitable year ever. So drop that down below for Tony for the upcoming episodes. And as always, you have more questions for Tony, you can reach out to him on your social media. Tony, where can everybody find you?
You can find me on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at the IP Professor. And you can check out my podcast, End Scene, and Entertainment Law Podcast, with new episodes dropping every Friday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Drop your legal questions on the publishing industry down below. Tony's coming back for upcoming episodes, but we're also dropping daily videos to help you navigate the world of your marketing, your writing, your publishing, and the legal side of publishing to make sure you're protected and you're making this your most profitable year ever. We don't want to miss out your critical thinking questions. Start thinking about the things that people aren't asking. What are the questions that you haven't had answers to? What are the questions you're not even asking yet? We can answer the basic ones as well, but we want to make sure that this is your most profitable year ever. So drop those down below and follow along for upcoming episodes. We'll see you there.